In a world brimming with mystery and magic, Kyra's fate is entwined with those she loves. As she finally gets the chance to reunite with her long-lost friend Azriel, she discovers her family's memories have been erased, forcing her to make a tough choice: restore their memories or let them live in ignorance. And as her relationship with Azriel heats up, an unexpected kiss complicates matters. With the Moonfall event approaching, can Kyra master her powers to protect her loved ones, or will she be consumed by her own strength? Explore the unknown. Subscribe to Kyra's adventure. Chapter 40. For the most part, I hadn't been able to concentrate on the task at hand. My mind was whirling with the possibility of seeing Azriel again, of having her talk to me like we had before. I had missed her dearly, and this revelation gave me hope I couldn't quite compare. A few times, I caught myself thinking about my family. I would like to undo their memories too, but would they accept me for who I was now? Part of me knew they wouldn't. Unlike Azriel, they would pose a risk to the werewolf world, and I knew I couldn't risk that, let alone Azriel. Try again, Kyra, Azriel urged. You almost had it that time. Concentrate your magic into the base of your palm. I nodded, unable to keep my grin off my face. I was going to see Azriel. She would remember me again, and things could return to the way they were. Well, not quite, but she'd be my taste of what my old life was. I wondered how much she had changed, and most importantly I wondered what she'd think of me now. Kyra. Azriel prodded. It took me a moment to realize I hadn't done what he'd asked. Sorry, Azriel, I rushed, sticking my palm out. The male sighed, gently pushing my arm down. I know you're excited, Kyra, but you must master this skill before we go anywhere near your old human friend. We also need this for the safety of the court. You have done an excellent job at keeping them away for now, but who knows when they'll be back again. I nodded. He was right, I would be only wasting my time by daydreaming. So, I outstretched my arms and closed my eyes, directing all my magic there. Feel it, Kyra, Azriel whispered. Feel what your magic is trying to tell you. It knows your power, and you must listen. I scrunched my brows, slightly frustrated when nothing came up for the umpteenth time. Come on, Kyra, you can do this, I thought to myself. Then something amazing happened. I felt noise. It wasn't that I could hear it, but rather I could feel it, the waves of vibrations climbing on top of each other, amplifying the thrum. The sensation of TV static at my fingertips, if such a thing were even possible. Ah, Azriel said simply, staring at the light which had formed in my palm. You're an amplifier. My heart leapt. The same as you. I allowed my magic to dissipate as I turned to grin at him. I did it. I muttered, staring at my palms. I did it. You sure did, and you did a brilliant job as well, Azriel said. I blushed at the compliment, but quickly masked it by saying, let's do it again. So we did. Being an amplifier himself, Azriel was able to help me better than he would have otherwise. As we trained, we talked. Apparently, an event called Moonfall was coming up, but how he explained it I assumed it was just a lunar eclipse. He explained that Moonfall marked a day of truce and that no one would attack. Even so, ambassadors from the other territories, who would come to celebrate here, were required to wear silver collars. I didn't know whether that fact reassured me or not. On one hand, they wouldn't be able to use their werewolf abilities due to the silver. On the other hand, if they had to wear silver, then was it really a day of truce? Eventually, we called it a day and emerged from the tree line. The sun had sunk far past the horizon, the last of its golden rays flickering in the dusk sky, determined to stay bright. Crickets and frogs alike clicked around us, replacing the usual melody of songbirds that came with day. The grasses at my feet were warm, licking my soles. We walked into the middle of the field where we both stopped, turning to face each other. Azriel looked gorgeous in the light of the sinking sun, with his onyx strands painted a strange gold, his azure eyes almost navy. "I had a lovely time with you, Kyra," he said, voice low and soft. I blushed, thankful for the lack of light around us. "Same goes to you," I said, attempting a smug smile, though it didn't really work with the way Azriel was staring at me. I felt like melting putty in his hand. Wordlessly, the male raised his hand to my cheek, grazing it lightly. My heart accelerated, the sensation of his cool skin again, my hot face tantalizing. "Yes, it was," he said, eyes glazed. Then, he leaned in and kissed me. It was a swift kiss on the side of my mouth, and I wasn't even sure it had happened until Azriel pulled back with a look of bewilderment. My heart was drumming erratically in my chest, stomach becoming a melted mess of butterflies. I gawped at him, too shocked to move and yet wanting nothing more than for him to kiss me again. My skin tingled upon where his lips had grazed mine, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. I stared into his eyes. They looked glossed over, confused, as though wondering why he'd done such a thing. He was staring at me with equal bewilderment, though we didn't have much time to mull over it before a voice called out behind us. "Lord Azriel." The male whirled. I was rooted to the spot, and it took every ounce of energy to peer over his shoulder. There, standing a few yards away, was Zion. I blushed fiercely, suddenly paranoid that he'd seen our kiss. Judging by his wide eyes and guilt-ridden face, I could only guess he had. He glanced between me and Azriel, trying to hide his shock but failing. He looked at me, and a different emotion passed through his eyes, something close to pain, but I couldn't quite be sure with the lack of light. "The Zeta wishes to see you," he stammered, turning quickly to walk away. Azriel did the same, sparing me not a glance as he trailed the beater, leaving me stunned in the middle of the yard. Chapter 41. As Azriel had warned, Moonfall had taken the court by storm. Within mere days after our expedition, blue and silver garlands had already been erected, the teepees of the grounds packed away, and replaced instead with large silver tents, their canvases glaring in the sunlight. I'd noticed the appearance of stranger wolves people, who were not part of this court. They sported grey pelters, silver collars ringing their throats. Raina had told me they were ambassadors from other courts, and it wasn't uncommon for them to visit during the Moonfall. She'd told me Moonfall was a symbol of truce among territories, though that notion didn't seem very substantial if the strangers were forced to wear silver collars to suppress their abilities. I hadn't told Raina about Azriel and I's expedition, about the swift kiss that had left me reeling for days after. But that had occurred over a week ago. Today, Moonfall was planned to occur, and the court was in a buzz. I'd noticed the lift in the mood when no one glared my direction, some even going so far as to smile at me. It was strange, but I wasn't complaining. The same couldn't be said for the ambassadors. Many had stone-set faces, none of which looked friendly. I noticed how some of their eyes glued to me, and I recalled Azriel's words of me being high talk among the other territories. From that point on, I'd tried to avoid the ambassadors' sights as best as I could, so I did what I did best: hide away in my room. I lay idly upon my bed mulling over my kiss with Azriel. I wasn't even sure if one could call it a kiss, more like a heat of the moment and error. Still, it wasn't like I could take it up with Azriel. He seemed to be avoiding me, as much as I'd been trying to avoid him. I wanted to press him about it, but, at the same time, I was too scared, though I wasn't quite sure of what. I sighed, pulling myself out of bed. I glanced at the golden wall clock, its hands reading 2. I knew Moonfall began at 6, so I decided it was best I get ready. As I was about to head to the ensuite to fix myself up, a knock sounded at my door. Before I could even reach the handle, the door flew open, catching me off guard. I was shocked to see Raina standing at its frame, her eyes beaming as she looked at me. She held a black parcel close to her chest, and she was bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Raina, what's all this? It's not like you to burst in here," I joked. Raina ignored me and made a beeline for the bed, where she placed the box. Raina barging into my room and ignoring me. All right, this was definitely strange. Azriel sent you this, she sang, and my heart skipped a beat. She whirled to face me, dimples forming on her cheeks as she smiled. He said you'd like it, and that nobody must see it until Moonfall. Oh my god, Kyra, open it already. I gawked at her. Why would Azriel send me something now, after such a long silence? Moreover, why couldn't he come here himself? Was he afraid to see me as much as I was to see him? I stifled a laugh at my own stupidity. He was the strongest werewolf in this territory, why would he be intimidated by the likes of me? Even so, I couldn't help my doubts as I towed towards the black parcel, swallowing. Raina tracked my every move with her wide eyes, her frame shaking with barely contained excitement. I was shaking, too, but not quite from excitement. I placed my hands upon the black paper, carefully unwrapping it. Within it, I found something like a black showbox, somehow made of even darker material. I looked towards Raina for some sense of security, and she nodded eagerly for me to open it. So, without another thought, I lifted the lid. A gasp escaped me. Within it sat something of darkest material, managing to suck up every bit of light that met its fabric. As I lifted it out of the box, I noticed the violet embroidery along its edges, the glimmering symbol of epsilon upon its back. As I held it before me, my eyes widened. He'd given me a pelta, and not just any pelta, but one with his colors. I turned to Raina for an explanation, but she looked just as shocked as me. My god, she muttered, staring at me in bewilderment. Kyra, do you understand how big this is? The Alpha is allowing you to wear his colors, this has never happened before. A large grin spread across her face, as to the dread spreading in my stomach. Oh my god, Kyra, he wants you to stand by him. He has recognized you to be one on his level. This is something Haluna could only have. She squeaked, grabbing my hands in her own. This can only mean one thing, Kyra, he loves you. My stomach turned into a melting pot of butterflies. What? Me? No way. I stammered, pulling away from her grasp. I stared at the pelta, which was now laid out on the bed. Its violet embroidery glittered in the filtered sunlight, and I had to admit it was gorgeous. I don't know what this is, or why he'd allow me to wear his colors, but he definitely doesn't love me. Raina just gave me an amused look that implied she knew better. Boiling over with barely contained energy, she grabbed the pelta and shoved it to my chest. We gotta get an outfit to match this thing, come on. We need to make you look as best as you can. All eyes will be on you tonight. I shivered. All eyes on me. I watched as Raina rummaged through my wardrobe, looking for something I could wear. I looked at the black material in my grasp, clamping my fists around the edges. Not so long ago, I would have hated the thought of being the center of attention. Not so long ago, I would have been desperate to remain in the shadows. I stared at the purple embroidery, loving the way it gleamed in the light. But now, who was I? I stared into a floor-length mirror, looking at the reflection of myself. I looked so different from the girl I used to be. I looked better, felt better. This was a different girl entirely, and yet she was still me. For a fleeting moment, I wondered what Alia would think of me if she were to see me now. Would she even recognize me? I chuckled at the thought. She'd forgotten me just as the rest of them had, of course. She wouldn't recognize me now of all things. Raina returned to me with a lovely black dress in her arms. She seemed to force herself back for a moment, giving me a look that asked if I was okay with this. I pondered. Was I ready? Once I did this, there was no turning back, not at all. But I was done holding on to the past. This was Kyra Itos, the fearsome Epsilon, who didn't take shit from anyone, not anymore the werewolf, who had the potential to save a territory. My territory. Resolve ran through me. I am ready. I nodded towards Raina, and a large grin spread across her face in response. Chapter 42. Raina and I were one of the last people to arrive, but perhaps that made it all the more better. As I walked from under the archway into the castle grounds that I had come to love, hundreds of eyes were on me in an instant. I keep my head up, determined to wear Azriel's colors with pride. That's right, I thought, glancing towards the theaters that had once treated me like crap, and the gammas that had once laughed at my expense. They shrunk under my cold scrutiny. I'm wearing the Alpha's colors now. I remember Zion had once warned me to not let it all get to my head. Well, it was, and I knew I had damned well earned the right. Despite the bustle of the event, silence seemed to greet me wherever I walked. People stared at me in absolute awe, a few going so far as to bow down to me, ones that had once referred to me as human trash, and an array of other horrible things. I paid them no heed. I would not give it to them, not yet at least. I wanted them to know I wasn't going to forgive them at the drop of a dime, for such things took time. I noticed a few wolves looked confused, namely the ambassadors in grey pelters. Silver glinted around their necks, almost as a taunt. All it took was someone to take it off, and they could wreak as much havoc as they wished. Raina took my hand, guiding me onwards. She was grinning from ear to ear, obviously enjoying the attention as much as I was. She was looking towards a few of the Omegas smugly, and I realized she was feeling the same thing as me, sweet spite. Those who had once called her an outcast were now gaping at her in awe, and I knew the feeling was divine. We continued our walk through the crowd. The makeshift tents, which had been erected around the grounds, glinted in the silver of the moonlight, people milling in and out of them. With my senses I could pick out the stench of alcohol, and it occurred to me I'd never seen alcohol here, not so much as smelt it. This must be a one-off thing. I looked ahead and my heart skipped a beat. A stage had been set up just before the forest, silver lights protruding to illuminate the lone figure atop of it. Azriel, and my God, he looked drop-dead gorgeous in the silver light. The light caught in his hair, running like rivers of silver upon the black strands. His blue eyes virtually glowed, almost like a pair of blue moons. I let out a small gasp as his gaze met mine, a smile forming upon his lips. I looked away, cheeks heating. All I could think about was our brief kiss, and how this was the first time he'd acknowledged me since. Was he planning on something tonight? What if he wanted to take it further? Worse yet, what if he didn't? What if he was going to cover it up, as some sort of mistake? The thought crushed me more than I'd care to admit. Just then, a woman walked on stage beside him. I'd seen her before, namely during the feasting where she'd sit on the left-hand side of Azriel. She was rarely present, and I'd never seen her talk to him, not until now. Her grey eyes looked almost black in the shadow of her face, her brown hair billowing on the wind. She sported a crimson pelta with a purple symbol on its back, and it took me a moment to realize it was his Zeta. Zion had told me about her. If Zion was Azriel's right-hand man, then she was his left hand. Strategist, very smart, and very elusive. She rarely made an appearance at mealtimes, and this was the first time I'd really been able to stop and get a good look at her. She whispered something in Azriel's ear. He nodded and she scuttled away, disappearing into the crowd. A sudden pang of jealousy rang through me as I realized I wasn't the only woman close to Azriel. I was his friend, sure, but she was his left hand, someone he took literal advice from. It was a stupid thing to mope over, but I couldn't help it. Just then, the lights brightened, and the crowd fell silent. Azriel cleared his throat, his voice inviting attention without demanding it. Slowly, he raised a microphone to his lips. Greetings, people of the Southern Court and ambassadors, and welcome to this year's Moonfall. He boomed. The sound of his voice alone sent a strange heat through me, but I quickly shook it off. We have a lot to celebrate tonight. As you may know, Tonight marks the night of the lunar eclipse, in which the moon will fall from the night's sky. Tonight we'll see many beautiful things. He glanced at me, and my heart fluttered as he shot me a brief wink. For just a moment, everyone else disappeared, and it was just me and him. The feeling didn't last, though, as he returned his attention to the gathered. And enjoy many beautiful memories. So please. A pair of hands roughly gripped my shoulders and whirled me around. I let out a startled yelp, as did Raina. Something strange ran through me as I met the cold gaze of Azriel, her eyes icy as they held mine. What do you want, Azriel? I ground out. I recalled the last time we'd talked, when she'd turned tail and ran off. Why was she manhandling me now? What did you do for it? She hissed, looking me over. I frowned. What on earth are you talking about? The Pelta, she snapped. Don't play dumb. I blinked. Fortunately, Raina was my voice, and luckily for us her words were a lot calmer than the ones running through my head. It was a gift from Azriel. She did nothing sinister to get it, if that's what you're implying. Bullshit, she hissed, shooting Raina a glare. And don't speak to me without my permission, Omega. Hey, I warned. Her glare returned to mine. Leave Raina out of this. Just what do you want to know? Her green eyes narrowed. Then, she let go of my shoulders, pushing me back. Nothing. I should have guessed you'd been whoring around with the alpha to get his colors. My jaw dropped as my cheeks flamed. I felt Raina bristle by my side. Azriel smirked at my reaction. I knew it. You must be enjoying the attention, right? You're one to talk about whoring. I snapped, feeling the rage build within me, along with that dreadful energy. I paused, and the energy went away in an instant. Control yourself, I told myself, staring at her smug smile. She's just trying to provoke you. Sucking in a deep breath, I grabbed Raina's arm and whirled us around. Come on, Raina, I told her, satisfied by Azriel's affronted expression by me turning my back on her. We don't need to be around this jealous bitch. Let's go elsewhere. Just then, I felt a tug at my pelter, and the sound of a rip. I whirled, aghast as I saw a piece of the material in Azriel's hand, her face contorted into a bitter sneer. She'd ripped my pelter. I didn't even have enough time to process what had happened before she whirled on her heel and took off. You bitch! Raina squealed, saying the words I couldn't form in that moment. When she started to take off after her, I finally found the mind to whip out my arm and stop her. It's all right, Raina, I said, my voice brimming with barely contained anger and defeat. You'll only land yourself in trouble. I've been there, trust me. After a few moments of hesitation, she nodded. I looked around, suddenly anxious we'd caused a scene, but thankfully our little skirmish had been masked by applause. I turned back to Azriel, who was now bowing towards everyone. For the smallest moment, I caught his eye, and I was forced to look away. Have a great moonfall, everyone. Chapter 43. I walked briskly through the crowd, suddenly hating the attention that was on me. I didn't know how badly the pelter was ripped, and I didn't want to turn around and find out, either. Kyra, slow down. Raina pleaded, barely keeping pace. It only made me walk faster. Kyra. What? I snapped, turning to face her. I regretted my words the moment I saw hurt flash through her eyes. I pinched the bridge of my nose and sighed. She wasn't the one I should be angry at, and if anything, I was madder at myself. Sorry, I mumbled, allowing my arms to fall to my side. She gave me a nod. I understand you're frustrated, I get it. She gave me a small smile, and though I didn't have the energy in me to return it, I appreciated it all the same. Raina always had a knack for saying the right things. It's just I began, fighting the tightness in my throat. I wouldn't allow myself to cry. Not here, Not in front of all these people. I blew out a long breath. She always manages to ruin everything for me, Raina, and I'm sick of it. But there's nothing I can do. I don't have that bitchiness in me, and I've never been good at dealing with these types of girls. Sure, Azu's usually tolerable, but to ruin my moment like that, I stopped, allowing my head to fall into my hands. I should have known this was going to happen whenever I was having a good time. Azure was always 5 paces away, ready to ruin it all. I'm sorry, Kyra, Raina said quietly. She stared over my shoulder, towards where I could only presume the tear was. If it makes you feel better, the rip's not that bad, really. And the fact it's night makes it all the harder to see, too. I gave her a weak smile. I was about to respond with something half-hearted when a voice sounded behind me. Why hello, Kyra dear, I've been looking all over for you. Faster than lightning I whirled, bright blue eyes clouding my vision. He looked even more gorgeous up close. Azriel, I stammered then, remembering we were in a crowd, added, Lord. The male shook his head with a smile, black hair shifting with the motion. He looked towards Raina, who of which looked ready to faint, and smiled. You don't mind if I take Kyra away from you for a bit, dear? She shook her head, speechless, then stood aside so he could walk up next to me. If I wasn't so shocked myself, I may have laughed at Raina's stunned expression. Throwing her a grateful nod, he extended his arm to me. With a shaking hand, I took it, noticing all the eyes that were on us. Azriel didn't seem to care, and for some reason, it only made me nervous. It seemed whatever confidence I had melted whenever it came to Azriel. Bidding Raina a silent farewell, I fell in stride with Azriel as he tugged me along, the crowd parting for us. His gaze was locked ahead, so I took my chance to admire him, his jawline and brows looking even sharper in the crisp moonlight. For a while, we walked in silence. I could feel a strange tension in the air, but from the calm look on Azriel's face and the slight bounce in his step, he didn't seem to be feeling it. I wanted to ask him about the kiss, and what it had meant, but I didn't want to make the situation any more awkward than it already was. Or maybe I was just imagining the awkwardness, overthinking as always. I know of a secret spot we can go, his voice cut through the silence. My heart accelerated in my chest as I pondered what that could mean. Secret spot. Alone. With Azriel. Sure enough, we were getting to the edge of the crowd, and I was starting to get nervous. I take it you like the gift? He asked. I blinked, and it took me a moment to realize he was referring to the Pelta. I nodded my head fervently. Yes, Lord Azriel, I love it, but why me? He raised his brows, still staring ahead. Why you? I shifted uncomfortably, but the male didn't seem at all fazed. I wish I could have his composure. Well, to be wearing your colors is a great honor, so why would you give it to someone like me? The male chuckled and shook his head, but he didn't give me an answer. Instead, he changed the subject. Don't you think the moon looks just wonderful tonight, my dear? I blinked and looked up at the sky. We were away from the crowds now, and without all the smoke and lights, I could see the moon a lot clearer. It was a bright white orb against the black canvas, its glow ethereal and bright like the light of a lone lighthouse. It almost looked like a silver supernova in the sky. There was something soothing about its light, and I felt my heart slow as I looked at it just a bit. I opened my mouth to respond when Azriel's hand suddenly clasped mine. I gasped as he pulled me into the forest, my heart beat impossibly loud in my ears. There was something electrifying about the contact of our skin, and I couldn't deny the sweat breaking out on my back. We are almost there, he whispered, pulling me along. I followed him in a trance, my eyes locked on our hands. Azriel guided me over stumped roots and large rocks until we reached a clearing I'd never seen before. I gasped. It was beautiful. The grasses were a lush green, the speckles of dew upon their blades reflecting images of the moon. A small lake sat in its center, its dark waters sprinkled with stars and the glowing silver of the moonlight. Frogs croaked a slow melody, the crickets quiet and reserved. I said nothing as Azriel pulled me in towards the lake, before stopping to look up at the sky. I find this is the best view of all places. I looked up. He was right. There was nothing to interrupt our view here, no lights, no smoke, no jarring voices. Just a clear-cut image of the night, of the blinking galaxies and the darkness in between. You make me feel things I've never felt before, Kyra, he whispered, his hand tightening on mine. My gaze snapped to his. What could he mean by that? His words set my heart on the verge of arrest, and I was sure any look, any move, would incapacitate me. Something in my gut stirred at the sincerity in his eyes, the way they seemed to fill with emotion as they gazed into mine. You're so headstrong, he continued. And beautiful, and amazing. And maybe you can't see that, but I can. The clearing darkened in my peripheral as the moon's light began to dwindle, but my eyes were too far lost in Azriel's to notice. I want you to be mine, Kyra. Then, he leaned over and kissed me. It was soft at first, light kisses that feathered over my lips, almost as though I was fragile china he were afraid to break. My bones melted into butterflies, sparkly explosions detonating in my gut. Part of me was frozen, still in time, whilst my other half felt so alive. He gently wrapped one hand around my neck and the other around my waist, pulling me into him. I shivered as his lips slid over mine, and I couldn't help myself as I answered with equal effort. I loved the coldness of his lips and the faint taste of whiskey on his mouth. I shivered with every feathering touch, with every gentle stroke of his fingers along my body. I knotted my hands in his hair, eager for more, wanting more. He pushed further into me, his eagerness matched by my own as his tongue slid over my lips, a slight groan escaping from his chest. I pulled him towards me, groaning slightly as his tongue made its way into my mouth, going along the underside of my lips. Gently, without taking his mouth from mine, he guided me backward until I lay flat on my back. My whole body ignited as he leaned over the top of me, his mouth continuing to slide along mine, a sudden primitive desire taking over. I want you to be mine, Kyra. And I want to be yours. I pulled him closer, forcing his weight atop me. I ground against his hips, eager for more of him. He seemed a little bit hesitant, likely surprised by my eagerness, but I was ready. I always had been. He disconnected from my mouth, giving me a look as though to ask if I was sure. I melted at the adoring look in his eyes, the way he gazed at me as though I was made of the stars themselves, as though I was the only girl in the world. I nodded, and he leaned down to kiss me again. Then a blood-curdling scream ripped through the clearing. Chapter 44. Time seemed to still. All I could feel was the stiffness of Azriel's body over me, the coldness in the air, the dread that seemed to build with every second passed. Screaming tore through the clearing again, along with a couple of other yells. Azriel jumped off me in an instant, and if I wasn't so fearful, I may have been disappointed that he'd done so. He turned to me, lifting me to my knees and grabbing both my hands as he knelt. He brought my face close to his. Kyra, you have to stay here, okay? His voice sounded raspy, and it took me a moment to realize he was desperate. The realization sent a chill down my spine, as much as it twisted my heart. Promise me. I know you may think you're ready to fight this, but I can't risk losing you. I know I sound selfish, but please. He was begging me, and I just couldn't say no. So I nodded, and taking that as word enough, he quickly shifted into his werewolf form and bounded out the clearing, leaving me in the wake of my own shock. I let out a shuddering breath as I stood, the screaming and yelling slightly distorted in my ears. Just moments ago, I had loved the darkness that Moonfall had brought, but now it just seemed eerie. I wanted to go out there and to see what was going on. I needed to Raina could be out there, and she might need my help. It only took a few moments of debate before I'd made up my mind. Though I felt guilty about breaking Azriel's swift promise, I could only imagine the guilt I'd feel if something happened to Raina. So, shifting into my werewolf form, I raced back to the castle grounds. The chaos became louder in my ears as I approached. By the time I reached the tree line, I was forced to stop, a gasp ripping from my throat. The scene was devastating. Tents had been set alight, their heat palpable from even all the way over there. People and wolves alike ran in all directions, and it took me a moment to realize some were pursuing whilst others were running. I watched as wolves pounced upon wolves and people, ripping into them with a kind of vigor that made my insides churn. I scanned the area, searching for any sight of Azriel or Raina. They were nowhere to be found. I didn't know what the hell had happened or what the hell was going on, but all I knew was that I had to protect the defenseless at all costs. Just then I spied a frantic omega running before me, a larger wolf in pursuit. Without another thought I took off, my paws pounding the ground as I closed in on the assailant. I watched in horror as the wolf tackled the omega to the ground, readying his claws to slice skin. A roar of desperation escaped me as I barreled into the wolf, and for a precious moment, his attention diverted to me. It was all I needed. I wasted no element of surprise as I sunk my teeth into the other wolf's neck. I held him there for a few seconds, waiting until he stopped struggling. Gore slipped through my maw, and I shivered at the metallic tang it brought. I turned towards the omega, who was just lying there, shocked. "Go, into the forest," I barked, my voice coming out as a guttural growl. The youngster nodded, and it wasn't long until he was lost in the thicket of undergrowth. I returned my attention ahead. I could feel the desperation inside me, the fear as I watched people of my own pack getting attacked. I felt the energy drumming against the inside of my skin, begging me to let it out. But I knew I couldn't. If I lost control, what good would I be to my friends? My pack? So, I continued to fight. It all passed in a blur. 1 minute I'd be fighting off a werewolf from a fragile omega, and the next I'd be fighting back to back with other theaters. I sustained a lot of injuries, and the bite one of them had landed on my shoulder was killing me, but I knew I had to keep going. I just had to. Throwing off another wolf, I heard a strangled yelp from behind me. I whirled, my eyes widening at the sight that greeted me. Azriel was standing in front of a group of omegas, all of them cowering in their human forms. She was in her human form, too, but the blue glow of her eyes and glint of elongated canines told me she was using lunar magic. Several wolves circled her, and yet she stood her ground. I watched in slow motion as one of them charged her, and before I knew it, I was rushing over to help. I barely made it in time to knock the wolf out the way, preventing the bite that would have claimed her leg. Azriel looked as shocked as I. Time seemed to still as we stared at each other, and a silent agreement passed between us. We may hate each other. We may want to tear each other out, but right now we had the defenseless to protect. We couldn't afford to let our differences to get in the way. So, we stood back to back, my fur brushing against her legs as I snarled towards our assailants. The kids cowered at either side of us. We eyed the stranger wolves like hawks, looking for an indication of attack. They snarled back at us, prowling, waiting, analyzing. For the longest time, we remained at a standstill. Then one barreled towards a girl on Azriel's side. Fortunately, she was quick to step out and intercept the attack that would have ended the omega's life. All it took was a swift lunar-powered punch, and the wolf was sent sprawling. Had the circumstances been different, I may have allowed myself to admire her strength. Then, 2 wolves charged for the omegas on my side, and I was aware of another wolf charging for Azriel. With no other option, I lunged forward to greet them. One of the wolves, a black one, managed to latch onto my collar. I ignored the pain that sang through me and focused all my energy on the other wolf, slamming him into the ground and biting his side. I tried to ignore the blinding pain as the other wolf twisted his teeth, tearing my sinew from bone, trying to distract me from his friend on the ground. I was about to deal with the wolf at my neck when I saw another wolf dart in my peripheral, making a beeline straight for one of the younger girls we were trying to protect. Time slowed, and I felt myself shriek as the wolf's teeth sunk into her throat, sending her blood all over the grass. I could feel that dreadful energy rising up within me, pleading, begging me to let it take control. I wanted nothing more than to keep fighting, than to stay in my right mind and protect those I loved. But the girl's wide eyes, her scarlet blood on the grass, the dead look in her gaze, it only told me one thing: we were losing. I looked again at the wolf who had attacked the girl. Azriel was on top of it now, but I could see she was slowing, and the blood growing on her white coat was hers. I was losing blood, too, and the wolf at my shoulder was only making it worse. I had no other option. I had to give up my control to it. Save them, I pleaded, closing my eyes as I freed the energy from its constraints. Kill me if you must. It thundered through me, my bones cracking and breaking as my wolf form grew even larger, even stronger. Energy pulsed throughout every inch of my being. I could feel its power in my muscles, my blood, my senses. A loud roar escaped my chest as my violet-tainted vision pulsed. I had never felt this much heat pulsing through me, this much power. And I loved it. With my large paw, I took the wolf that was clamped on my chest, whose body had now stiffened with fear, and held her before me. She yelped and whimpered as I slammed her into the ground, wrapping my jaw around her neck. Without another thought I bit down, the metallic taint in my mouth only fueling my bottomless hunger. The wolf that had attacked me was scrambling towards the forest. I didn't let him get far, he only managed a couple of paces before I took him up in my jaw, and shook him like a dog would do a rat. I threw its disorientated form on the ground and started to bash his skull in, and after a few beats, he went still. But it wasn't enough. Azriel was still fighting, and my people were still around me, struggling, dying. I needed more power. More? I called into the abyss, my body shaking with energy. More? Electricity surged through me, and I howled as my blood became white-hot. My whole body was thrumming, every inch of me burning. But I didn't care. I needed to save my people. The group of the enemy wolves before me who had once sneered were now cowering. At impossible speeds I pounced on them, managing to pin two under my giant body. I wrapped my hand around one of their heads and squeezed, forcing energy to my palm. A sickening crunch sounded beneath me as I crushed his skull. The other one began to panic as I wrapped my furry hand around his head. He begged for mercy, but all his pleas fell deaf on my ears. All I could hear was my anger, my rage, and the need to kill anyone and anything that proved a threat to me and my people. I crushed his skull as easily as one would shatter glass. I turned around, looking for my next target, and instead found the shocked gaze of Azriel. She looked nothing short of horrified, but at that moment I didn't care. I saw enemy wolves running behind her, tail between their legs as they tried to make an escape. The sight angered me, sending another wave of power through my body. How dare they come here, hurt my people, and turn tail the moment they begin to lose? Cowardice! I bellowed. Something in me responded to those words because before I knew it, I was charging after them, the thumps of my pads sending reverberations through the ground, shaking the earth beneath me. A rattling melody that signaled the oncoming end of their lives. Their eyes widened as they caught sight of me. I grabbed one of their heads between my maw, closing my teeth around them as I bit down, crushing them. I tossed it away and headed for the other who, upon realizing he couldn't outrun me, reverted to his naked human form and begged for mercy. I pushed him on his back and brought my fist down, shattering every inch of his chest. His eyes bulged, conveying the scream his shattered lungs could not. I left him there to die. Let him suffer. It wasn't long before I caught up with the last one. I planned to give him a slow, painful death starting at the stomach, but he had other plans. I snapped my teeth towards his torso, but during my strike, he'd managed to maneuver himself, so his neck bared the brunt of the blow. I opened my mouth, allowing his limp form to fall. It was a smart move on his behalf, I knew, but cowardly all the same. My vision jutted. Heat seared through me, but it didn't feel good this time. My blood was boiling, and it felt like every inch of me was on fire. I shrieked as splitting pain took over, forcing me to the ground. I writhed around, tears forming as I slowly reverted to my human form, the blistering fire inside me growing with every second that my wolf was absent. People were calling my name, but I couldn't hear them over the ringing in my ears. The shredded pelta around my body felt too hot and too heavy, and I clawed at it to get it off, but it only seemed to twist further. Sweat dripped from every pore, my head pounding as though I were being boiled. I glimpsed Azriel's form crouching over me, her eyes glowing blue, as she held her hands out, a green glow at her fingertips. "Don't you dare give up on me, damn it," she sobbed through gritted teeth, her face contorted with pain. Everything started to fade. I could hear yelling and clamor, and then someone grasped my hand. They continued to hold it, even though I could sense the pain it caused them. "My mate," I heard them say. Azriel. Chapter 45 Zion's P.O.V. I hadn't attended Moonfall that night, not when I knew I couldn't go with her. No, because she was going with him. I'd seen their little exchange the other day, their kiss. I knew Kyra loved him simply by the way she looked at him, that doe-like look that sparkled with pure adoration. A sight that put a spear through my heart. If it wasn't for the screaming, the stench of smoke and blood, I would have remained in my chambers all night long. It was mayhem. People were scrambling left and right, some engaged in battle, while others were being downright mauled. I'd looked high and low for Kyra, battling enemy wolf and saving my own as I did so, but I hadn't found her anywhere. Suddenly, the wolves had begun running away, and I knew why when I'd heard the earth-splitting roar. Kyra. She was beautiful, beautiful and deadly. Her black fur glowed its indigo tint in the dim moonlight, her eyes a bright violet, as she became consumed with emotional energy. Her form was muscular and lithe, easily bigger than Azriel's or mine. I'd watched her attack the enemy wolf, and I had never seen something so barbaric, not in my 150 years of existence. So barbaric, yet so beautiful. She'd flitted around like a deadly force, demanding terror wherever she went, pinning enemies on their backs and killing them without a second thought. I'd stared with the others, watching in awe as this deadly movie played out. At one point, she'd killed a wolf who'd reverted to human form, begging for mercy. It was only then that I started to feel slightly sick. This isn't Kyra, I'd told myself. This isn't the kind girl I know, this is a beast. Something of pure wrath and rage. It was too much, she was killing too many, spilling too much blood. Part of me wanted to protect her, she was too innocent for this, too young. But who was I to intervene? I'd told her the rules, kill or be killed, and she was doing a damn good job. But it still didn't sit right with me. I'd killed many men, too, but this wasn't Kyra. This wasn't the girl who had cried in my arms, the girl who smiled at my witty remarks before sending ones of her own, the girl who insisted she sit with omegas despite the classist mindset of the theaters. This was another creature entirely, one that demanded terror where she walked, one that would take no prisoners. But maybe it was the way it was meant to be. Even so, my heart ached. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. An ugly screech ripped from her throat as she collapsed and shrunk, visible steam rolling off her body. Blood drained from my face, and within moments I was rushing over. I'd never seen a burnout happen, not with my own eyes. I'd heard of them, an event that occurs when a wolf exerts too much magic, but I'd never seen one myself. But I did know that oftentimes, burnouts were deadly. I'd arrived at her side. Her chest was rising and falling erratically, her breathing strained and wheezed. Azriel was hovering over her form, trying to heal Kyra, as she sobbed hysterically. Azriel was nearby, his eyes lined with silver as he yelled for more medics. I'd collapsed to my knees, grabbing her clammy hand in my own. It burned to the touch, but I persisted through the pain. This pain was nothing compared to hers, not at that moment. I'm so sorry I let this happen, I thought, biting back tears. I hated how beautiful she looked, even so close to death. The way her eyes fluttered, how her hair was draped across her body, it made my heart twist. I clutched her hand harder. It was wrong of us to put the weight of the court on her, so wrong. I realized that now, and I got the feeling Azriel did, too. But, without her, we'd be nothing. I'm sorry, I thought again. My mate, I finished aloud, bowing my head. Amid the chaos, no one heard my words, but I could have sworn something twitched in Kyra's face almost in response. I gripped her hand tighter, ignoring the red-hot pain of her skin on mine. You've saved us all, I thought. But at what cost? We do a little trolling. And DW, this isn't going to turn into a badly written love triangle LOL. Chapter 46 Kyra P.O.V. The darkness was soothing. It cooled every inch of me, leaving icy kisses along the skin that once seared. My mind was no longer on fire, instead, it was a pool of water, calm and still. I was okay here, I was safe. I was alive. Sounds came out of the darkness, warbled voices I couldn't quite discern. I paid them no heed, though. I just remained afloat the waters, allowing the cold to seep into my body, cooling my soul and my mind. It was a place where time didn't exist, and neither did I. Really, I wanted to stay there forever. Suddenly, something whipped out from the darkness, striking my core and leaving a dull heat in its wake. And then came the pain. Oh, God, the pain. It seeped from my core and spread to my extremities, radiating off my skin in burning waves. The calm waters around me began to heat up, and before long it was boiling. I whimpered as the heat tore through, sending unbearable waves of pain through every inch of me. The voices became clearer, louder, and suddenly I could discern them. Kyra. I knew that voice. It was so familiar, yet so foreign, but something pulled me towards it. I was clinging to an imaginary rope, pulling myself against the rapids as they slammed and crashed, dragging me under. My muscles screamed in agony, but I had to get to the voice, I had to get out of here. My eyes snapped open, a gasp ripping through me. White light seared my retinas, and for a fleeting moment I thought I was dead. I started to panic. I couldn't die, not yet. I wasn't ready, Kyra. The voice was next to me now. I craned my neck, my heart calming as I spied a pair of familiar green eyes amid the white. Look at me, all right. You're okay. I nodded, gawking towards the figure as my eyes struggled to adjust. I could soon make out his sharp features, his long red hair, and lean body. My lips quivered as pain and relief alike swelled within me. Zion. I squeaked, my voice quiet even to my own ears. I couldn't see the male's expression as he launched forward, gathering me up in a hug. My body screamed in protest, but I didn't care. I was alive. I was here, with Zion, with someone I knew. Before I knew it, tears were streaming down my hot cheeks. I felt a wetness form on my chest. You're okay, he repeated, more to himself than me. You're okay. Zion's body shook, and despite myself, I became worried. Lord Zion. I rasped. Drop the damned Lord, he stammered, and it took me a moment to realize the wetness on my chest was his tears. He held me as he shook with silent sobs. I simply closed my eyes and allowed myself to take in his heat, his comforting weight. After a few moments, he pulled back, bloodshot eyes staring into mine. We thought we'd lost you, he whispered, his voice quaking. I'd never seen him so upset before, and seeing this side of him felt almost illegal. He was a rock, my rock, in many ways, and to see him breaking down like this. He shook his head, covering his eyes with his hands. Kyra, all the medics were so sure you wouldn't survive the burnout. Your temperatures were through the roof, and you were having seizures every hour. We really didn't think. He stopped himself. He was rambling, I knew that much, but my mind was mush and I couldn't process what he was saying. I just remained quiet, as he wiped away the rest of the tears, giving me a weak smile. But you're here, and you're okay. I nodded, and it was only then that I was reminded of the searing pain in my body. I hissed, Zion jumping up immediately. What's wrong? Nothing, I assured him. It was only then, when I realized I was in the infirmary. Everything just hurts. He helped me lay back down, grinning despite his blotched cheeks. That's an easy fix. I can get you some pain medication for that. Stay here. Despite my pain and atrocious state, an amused smile broke out across my lips. Where else could I go in my state? Maybe Zion was more discombobulated than I originally thought. As he turned to leave, a sudden thought occurred to me. Wait, I started, going to sit up, but, remembering my pain, lay back down. How are Azriel and Raina? Are they okay? Zion nodded. Yes, they are fine. They've come by to visit you, especially Azriel. Well, more than you'd expect, anyway. But I guess it's what to expect after what happened. There's something about fighting back to back that creates an unbreakable bond. My eyes widened. Azriel visited me. I didn't allow myself too long to ponder on what that could mean. And Azriel? I asked, swallowing. Pain flashed through Zion's eyes and my heart dropped. For a fleeting moment, I feared the worst. No, he's fine. I blew out a breath of relief, a manic laugh escaping my chest. He's been here almost all day every day, he continued quietly. My laughter stopped. He went back up to his room about an hour ago, because he hasn't slept in 3 days. He's been by your side this whole time. He paused, and I saw his throat bob. He really cares about you, Kyra. He said he would like to see you as soon as you wake up, when you would wake up. Maybe it was my disorientated mind, but I could have sworn there was a certain pain to Zion's voice, a tone of regret. Before I could question him any more, he was out of the room, muttering something about how Azriel would be overjoyed to see me. Chapter 47. After Zion's brisk departure, Dr. Herschel returned minutes later with pain medication. My body still bleated with pain, but the aches were much less intense. After some help, I managed to get on my feet. I was dressed in a thin, white gown, hugging my sides like a simple dress. I dragged my black hair up in a ponytail to look at least half presentable before I emerged into the hallways. I noticed how a few people stopped to stare at me, their gazes ranging from awestruck to sheepish to downright fearful. I paid them no heed. I just had to get to Azriel. I raced up the main stairs, taking a right instead of the usual left towards my room. I knew his quarters were located in one of the court's towers, specifically the one at the far right, but who knew if I was headed in the right direction? I just had to hope my sense of direction was correct, even in my dulled state of mind. Once I got to the bottom of the tower, I groaned. A set of spiral stairs stared me in the face. Of course, what had I expected? Sucking in a deep breath, I climbed up them, ignoring the dull ache of protest in my muscles. I knew I'd arrived at the right place when I'd ended up in a small lobby, its black carpet fitting the black painted door before me. Its handle was glossy gold, matching the gilded patterns that had been etched into the door, which upon closer inspection I realized were a bunch of tiny alpha symbols. Whoever had crafted this must have had a very delicate hand. I raised my hand to the door, hesitating. What if he was asleep? He had been awake for 3 days straight, after all, and not even a wolf could remain awake for so long. And it wasn't like I could just enter unannounced. I mean, what if he was naked? I found myself blushing at the thought, but I quickly shook it away. We'd been grinding on each other the other day, surely it wouldn't matter if I accidentally stumbled upon him undressed, right? Sucking in a deep breath, I palmed the handle and twisted it, pushing the door open as quietly as I could. As I'd expected, the room was lavish. Black hardwood floors were polished raw, and I could see my own sallow reflection staring back at me. A golden-laced rug was in the center, where two black velvet chairs sat before a golden accent table. Mahogany drawers and large bookshelves lined the room, stacked with books. In fact, there were books lining almost every corner of the room. I never knew Azriel was into reading. My eyes traveled forward, towards where a four-poster large bed stood. Its black satin covers bore close resemblance to Azriel's hair, the golden pillows matching the gossamer curtains that hung above every window. And, sitting upon the bed, with his head in his hands and his back hunched over, was Azriel. "Go away, Zion," he muttered. His voice sounded heavy with defeat, and my heart dropped. "I'll go to bed soon, just Azriel." His head snapped up, and I had to resist the urge to flinch. He looked like a mess, his eyes were bloodshot, and by the black bags under them, I could safely say he hadn't slept in days. He eyed me in disbelief, slowly getting to his feet. His pants were crinkled, his white shirt disheveled and hanging off his frame like rags. He stared at me as though I wasn't real, like I was a ghost that had come back to haunt him. His bottom lip quivered as he stood to approach me, his delicate fingers reaching out to caress my cheek. Electricity formed upon the contact, and I didn't resist the urge to lean my head into his palm. "Kyra," he breathed, before wrapping me in a tight hug. One of his hands laced through my hair, while the other tugged at my waist, pulling me closer. I felt his body shaking against mine, and if he hadn't drained himself of tears already, I assumed he may have cried. I was crying tears of relief. "He's safe," I thought joyfully. "He's alive. He's here." "I thought I was going to lose you," he said, his voice so impossibly quiet that it almost broke my heart. I had never seen him so vulnerable. I swallowed the tightness in my throat, trying to sound light-hearted despite the tears in my own eyes. "Hey, I don't die so easily, do I?" His body shook harder, as he pulled me further into his embrace. I loved the feeling of his hard body against mine, the way our warmth mingled. I loved the way his hot breaths, despite being jagged and uneven, brushed against my neck. After a few moments of silence, Azriel pulled back and kissed the top of my forehead, the tenderness of his gesture making my insides melt. "I love you, Kyra," he said, the words stealing the air from my lungs. "I love you, and I never thought I'd get to tell you. I thought you would go to your grave without ever knowing how much I loved you." He stopped himself, obviously fighting the tightness in his throat. His words warmed my heart, and new tears formed at my ducts. I tenderly grabbed his hand, elevating myself to my toes as I kissed his lips. They felt so full and soft against mine, so safe. I realized this was where I belonged, safe in his arms, beside him. With him. "I love you too, Azriel," I murmured, and I meant it. I'd loved him for a long time, I just hadn't the spine to admit it. Azriel began to shake again, and within seconds I was tangled within another one of his tight hugs. He kissed the top of my hair, and I felt my knees go weak at the gesture. "I'm never letting you go, Kyra," he promised, gripping me tighter. "I'll never let you go that close to the edge, never again." And I believed him. In fact, I knew deep in my heart that he would keep me safe. "I love you," I felt his throat bob against my head. Silence ensued, and I waited for whatever words would leave his mouth next, for the next lull of his lovely voice. My mate. Chapter 48. Almost a week had gone by since the attack on the court. Turns out the whole thing had been planned. Ambassadors from the Eastern Court had tampered with their collars and managed to get them off. Amid the chaos, the Western and Northern ambassadors had managed to get their collars off, too, and the attack had spiraled from there. It was rumored that many of the ambassadors had purposefully delayed the attack in hopes of finding me. I wasn't sure true those rumors were, and I wasn't really willing to debate their authenticity. Apparently, though, many had realized they were gunning for a lost cause when they saw me transform into a monster. They knew it was too late. Azriel had told me that now they knew the extent of my power, the attacks from here on out would only lessen. He hadn't stopped gushing about how proud he was of me, about how happy he was that everyone would finally be able to live in peace for the first time in a long time. I was proud of myself, sure, but I knew I wasn't done yet. As Zion had said, all it would take was a well-coordinated attack and this court would be overrun, and I couldn't let that happen. Sure, I'd managed to scare them off, but that was only for now. I still had a long way to go with controlling my power. What use would I be if I lose control, and I'm put out of commission anyway? I had to be present for the whole fight, and that meant partitioning my energy in so I wouldn't reach burnout. Something that took a lot of time and focus. But not even my savior's presence could lift all despair. The palace had a heavy air to it, a solemnness that I knew would haunt the halls for years to come. People had lost their friends, their mothers, their siblings, and so much more. Wounds like those never heal easily. Even the buildings themselves had sustained some damage. Not much, but still enough to leave a couple of scars for centuries to come, a reminder of the fight that had gone down. The tragedies. I'd noticed the look people had given me, how the name-calling and glares had stopped entirely. I didn't think they trusted me yet or fully respected me, but this middle ground was calm, and I would not take it for granted. Today was calm. Solemn, but calm. I kept my head down and my eyes forward as I made my way towards the archway, outside into the castle grounds. Part of me ached when I stepped out of the grasses, some of the dirt upturned and singed from the attacks. I tried not to look at it for too long. The sky was bright, and the birds were chirping as though nothing was wrong, as though this whole palace wasn't hurting. The attack broke Azriel more than he cared to admit, but I guess that was expected with the number of losses we'd copped. It was one of the greatest casualty events in the last 100 years, according to Zion. I strode out into the grounds, my feet taking me to the right where I knew the graveyard would be. Many graves had been erected this past week, at least 50. Many had fallen, namely defenseless omegas and thetas who had laid their lives down for the sake of the pack. Some were missing, likely whisked off in the midst of battle and never to return. A few of them had even been in my class, and their absence seemed to wound us all. For a moment I thought back to Olkan and his friends, and I was eternally grateful that they had not stuck around long enough to have been part of this. I was thankful they were safe at their outposts, likely bickering and laughing without a care in the world. If any of them were 6 feet under right now, I think I would be shattered beyond repair. I wrapped my hands tighter around the bouquet of white roses, their petals fresh like winter snow. Azriel had handed it to me as a gift, but knowing it would make him feel better, I promised that I would commemorate our fallen by placing the flowers at their graves. That had certainly lifted his mood. The graveyard waned into view. People were milling about the rows, standing solemnly before the newer graves. Some were sobbing, while others just stood there numbly, reading their loved ones' names over and over. No one seemed to notice my presence once I arrived, and I was thankful for that. I headed over to one of the graves. Its headstone was carved from white marble, and as I read the words etched into the stone, I choked. Omega Tessa White, age 13. A loving sister, daughter, and friend. May she frolic in the moon plains. Suppressing the sting in my eyes, I placed a singular flower upon the stone. So young, I thought to myself. I could only imagine the fear she endured as she was mauled to death by those barbarians, and my fists clenched. I thought back to the way I had mercilessly killed them, in a barbaric nature that was 10 times theirs. They deserved it, I reminded myself as I read the gravestone. For killing this little girl, they deserved what I did to them and more. It was what I'd been telling myself this past week, a justification for my actions. I quickly turned away, not wanting to face the fact I'd killed someone again. Sure, I'd done it before to protect my Omega friends, and this time was just as necessary, but that didn't stop murderer from popping into my head time and time again. At the end of the day, I'd killed someone, and what did that make me? I was about to turn towards the next grave when I heard a sniffle from behind. I crept a look over my shoulder, and what I saw made me freeze. Azriel was there. She was bent over a grave, eyes brimming with crystal-bright tears. Her hands shook as she placed a flower at the foot of a gravestone. She swiped a hand under her nose, and I noticed how creased and crinkled her clothes were. In fact, judging by her messy hair and clothes, it looked like she hadn't washed up in days. Azriel? I asked before I could stop myself. Her crying stopped immensely, her gaze snapping up to meet mine. Several emotions ran through her eyes: shock, embarrassment, then anger. I paused for a moment, not knowing what to say. Did someone close to you die? I asked softly. Her eyes widened as her nostrils flared. No. She snapped, her voice strained. Nobody close to me died. Get lost. Before I could get in another word, she threw down her flowers and stormed off. I watched after her in silent shock. What had that been about? I peeked at the grave she'd been bending over just moments before. Omega Stellar Moon, age 14. A loving daughter and friend. May she rest in the moon plains. I jolted. I recognized her name. She was one of the Omegas Azure, and I had set out to protect, the only one who had died because one wolf had managed to slip past our defense. I stared after the retreating form of Azure, cocking my head to the side. Who really are you, Azure? If you enjoy Kyra's story, don't forget to subscribe, more excitement is coming.